St. Thomas never read Apocalypse.
No, he says it's in Genesis. If animals are in the earthly paradise before the fall, then it's logical that they would be back after.
Are you in the no?
I'm in the yes.
That there will be animals.
Yes.
We are. Not Bishop.
I'm undecided.
I was in the no.
You'll have to ask us.
St. Thomas
Aquinas.
Which is pretty weighty.
Okay.
I think it's because of all of his arguments involve the incorruption of heavenly bodies, which I'm not so sure about that. I know that was the common belief back then that planets are incorruptible, but if they're not, then
Everything is corruptible.
then those arguments wouldn't be as weighty.
Well, Zach also said we get our body.
Oh yeah.
So we would be inhabiting a corporal world, so we would have corporal things.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like the proper object of our senses and everything would be lacking.
But no pitfalls.
I hope they will be in there, Hal.
No pitfalls.
Does anybody know why there is air conditioning in that room?
Because of the machinery.
So the whole room has to get air conditioned?
I don't know.
Gotta do something about that. Seems crazy to have air conditioning when it's like 10 degrees inside.
Maybe we just open the window in that classroom, put a fan there.
Well, we're gonna fix that. We're not running that air conditioning. It's freezing in there. And the machines are still warm. That room needs it, not the whole room, not the whole library. We'll fix it. All right. Nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, Amen. Veni Sancte Spiritus, repletivorum cora fidelium, et tui amoris inieis inium accende, emite spiritum tuum creabuntur, oremus Deus cora fidelium, Sancti Spiritus illustratione docoisti, da nobis in iodem spiritu recta sapere et eius amber consolatione godere, per Christum Dominum nostrum, sede sapientiae,
ora pro nobis.
Nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, Amen. So we're talking about the liberal state, which is very topical because it has to do with Vatican II, religious liberty, etc. So, yes, we're on page 53, the very same. So we're talking about the essential elements of society, subjects and ruler. The very same is proven if we consider the subjects, they are men, that is, moral beings to be directed not through violence but by law. Because, therefore, political authority which espouses political atheism rests on no moral principle, the laws which are made by it are based on no principle which is higher than some individual's idea. So, in other words, there is no authority saying what is right and wrong. So it's somebody's idea about what is right and wrong. That's the point of that. The citizens cannot consider the authority to be morally superior to themselves. That's what he thinks. See? And cannot consider the laws as having force of moral obligation. They oppose instead their own individual reason to the reason of the individual in power. Say like transgenderism, you see? The Democrats think it's wonderful, the Republicans say it isn't. In other words, there's no moral authority to say yes or no on that, so then everybody is divided. There remains the material force of him who is in power. So then the person in power has the ability to enforce it somehow. But material power is not the bond of human society. Then you have basically dogs that are whipped instead of people obeying laws. Hence, this material force can be avoided through malice and can even be overcome by revolution. So it invites revolution. Hence, through force, impious and stupid rulers can be deprived of their power by the citizens, which power they have abused against God. In such a way, it happens that the political authority which rises up with supreme impiety against God will see its own subjects rising up against itself. So there's really nothing stopping the idea of revolution. In other words, you're no better than we are, so if we can get enough people together, we'll oust you. Which is not a rule of law. That's a rule of a mob. So that political atheism is impious is obvious. For if it is impious that the citizen deny to God the duties of religion, then it is utterly impious in those who rule society. The origin of society is God. So the first rule of society is to render God his due. Authority comes from God. So a society comes from God. This is the whole point. There's no reason why somebody sitting in Congress has the right to tell you what to do, or that a judge can condemn you to death. He's just another guy. What right does he have to do that? Where does that come from? Where does that authority come from? That he can send you to jail for the rest of your life. If it is not from God, then it's pure material force. The police come and grab you and drag you to jail. And you can't do anything about it. For they are men themselves, and therefore are bound to the duties which men owe to God. They are rulers, and as such, in the example of virtue and religion, must be preeminent in comparison to their subjects. So they, most of all, should be religious. They exist for the good of society, and therefore they must not subvert religion or neglect it, but with all their might promote it, in order that men, by means of society, from which they have the right to expect moral perfection, do not instead receive damage in those things which pertain most of all to perfection, namely religion and the eternal salvation of the soul. So the state should not be opposed in any way to what the church does, or thwart it in any way. It should, to the contrary, help it, because the most important thing is the salvation of souls. Your body's going to die, all your goods will be given away to your relatives, they'll die, and then somebody else will get it, and it all falls apart. So the next point is liberty of conscience. This is very much pertains to Vatican II, etc. So the notion of liberty of conscience, it is defined as the faculty of thinking and acting however one pleases in matters that pertain to God and religion. So we ask whether man truly enjoys this right or this liberty of conscience. This is very topical. The modern world is all based on this. The first thing to be noted, this is Cardinal Ziliara, it is never permitted to impose the faith upon infidels through violence, since to believe pertains to the will, as St. Thomas says. So we're not talking about putting a gun to somebody's head and saying, accept Catholic baptism or else I pull the trigger. We're not talking about that at all. And that is the Vatican II, excuse me, SSPX interpretation of the religious liberty document. That the church is saying you shouldn't put a gun to people's heads and, become a Catholic or I'll shoot. Which is absurd if you read the document. That's an absurd interpretation of it. The church has always held that there should be no pressure. And if there ever was pressure, it was against the teaching of the church. I mean, if anybody like Charlemagne is with the Saxons, he said, if you don't accept baptism, I'm going to slaughter you. It was not right. They revolted against him a number of times. And he had it with them. So, no, that is not Catholic. And the document on religious liberty has really nothing to say about that or nothing to do with that. It definitely is religious liberty in the condemned sense. So for this reason, they calumniate the Catholic Church who say that it inflicts violence upon consciences in order to disseminate the faith of Christ. The second thing to be noted, in order that there be the exercise of true liberty, it is necessary that it not detract from any duty. Very important point. For liberty does not exist for evil but for good. A very important point. Free will exists for good. It is given to us by God for good. It cannot have an evil object. Therefore, for as often as man abuses liberty for the purpose of committing evil, it should not be called liberty, but instead license. So it is a perversion of liberty to use it in order to elect something evil. It is a perversion, you might say, of steering to purposely take your car and drive it into a ditch. It is not made for that. It will cause untold damage. So the salesman never says to you, you can drive this car into a ditch. Look at this. This is wonderful. See, you can drive into ditches, you can drive into rivers, just, wherever you want. And, on the other hand, if he said, if you spend an extra $10,000, you will have a car that will never have an accident. Guaranteed. It will always stop where it should. Yes?
You talk about Teslas here or something?
Well, I don't think so. Teslas have had a few accidents. No, but I'm saying the point is that if liberty is in such a way directed that it cannot defect, that is a perfection of liberty. So our Blessed Lady had that. She was not any less free because she was protected from defection. Our Blessed Lord. She was not any less free. God is not less free because he cannot elect evil. It's a perfection of liberty to not be able to sin. Because liberty is made for the good. It's a precise purpose, is to elect the good freely. Animals cannot elect. They just have instincts, they see, they do. They cannot elect to abstain from meat on Fridays because of mortification. But we elect the good because we see the ratio of how it is a good end for us. Animals cannot do that. They understand, yes, that something is a good or something is not good, but they cannot see the ratio, the reason how the object relates to your good. That's the essence of liberty. And that there is certain, you have a limited good, so you're free in front of that. If you were, in front of God, you're not free. The act of loving God is not free in the beatific vision because it is the absolute fulfillment of the will. In other words, the there is nothing in it that whereby the will would not elect it. You'll see that in another course. So that's not considered a free act. Just as when the intellect sees truth, it's not a free act. See, there's an immediate adherence to truth. Now, you could deny it in the sense that you don't want it to be true. You can say, well, I don't believe that, or but you still know down deep that it's true. That's known as being in bad conscience or being false. I mean, it's where you know better and what you adhere to something anyway. In other words, becoming a Protestant because I want to divorce my wife. See, but the intellect cannot refuse truth when it's in front of it, when it sees it. It's just like a mathematical problem. You cannot, when you see it, you cannot dissent from it. Unless you could say, well, I don't believe 2 + 2 = 4. You could say a stupid thing like that, but you don't mean that, because you know that 2 + 2 does equal 4. Except in Oregon, in the Oregon school district, then there's more than one right answer to a math question. Just remember that. So, except for Oregon. Those stupid people. So that's to understand what liberty is. To ask, therefore, whether liberty of conscience is licit is the same thing as to ask whether or not liberty of thought and of acting, however one pleases, in respect to God and religion, detracts from our duties toward God himself. This is precisely the sense of the question, and under this aspect it must be solved, and its solution is easy. So, does liberty of conscience offend our duties that we owe to God? The fact that we can believe or think whatever we please, is that contrary to the duties that we owe to God? That's the question. The third thing to be noted, the question posed in this manner can be defined, one, absolutely by considering liberty of conscience in itself, relatively by considering liberty of conscience as it regards civil peace. Under this second aspect, it is principally defended by the adversaries. See, so that there be peace. First conclusion, liberty of conscience considered in itself is absolutely impious. For man is by a most strict duty bound to think correctly about God. That's the most important thing he thinks about. And concerning those things which regard both speculative and practical religion, morality and who God is and how do we get to him. But to go against the most strict duty of nature is license, not liberty. Because liberty is made for the good. If we are talking about a voluntary transgression of our duty toward God, the aforesaid license is impiety. As it takes on an act against religion, a sin against religion. That's impiety. If it is simply freedom of conscience about, whether we want to take the vaccine or not, you see, that's not an impiety. You can be right or wrong about that. Yes.
Would St. Thomas More's conviction, was he silent? Was that remaining in the proper sense, free in conscience? The oath of succession, I believe.
Oh, I see. Remaining silent about that oath, is that it?
I know that he's got a corrupted image by some people in the modern church who think he's conscious, like a liberal sort of the mind. I don't know. Like St. Francis of Assisi being a pantheist, almost that same kind of corruption.
Oh, I see. No, I think that I never read a biography of his, but I think that the idea was that whatever way there was to avoid the confrontation with the king, if it was a legitimate way in which to do it, he would take it. And really, martyrs do have to use means to avoid martyrdom as much as they can. In other words, they can't, at least can't seek it out. They can't go kick the emperor, call them names and things like that. They can't seek it out. That's part of martyrdom. You can't provoke martyrdom. So whether he was right or wrong about it, he may have been right or wrong. I think that's what he was doing, was that, don't forget, he was a lawyer and thinking of every possible means of avoiding the confrontation with the king, I think. Don't forget, kings die. The next one might not be so bad. You see? That's why the church waits out a number of bad rulers. They pass away, but the church never passes away. So anyway, therefore, through liberty of conscience, the right is given to man to think concerning God however he pleases. This liberty, this right, is truly an impiety. All right? That's why Vatican II is really, really bad for that. I mean, don't let anybody talk you out of that idea that it did not contradict Catholic doctrine. We'll see the papal documents on religious liberty later on. Now, liberty of conscience, considered socially, if it can be tolerated in given circumstances, must never be approved, but much less protected or inculcated. That it can be tolerated in certain cases is easily admitted. You remember, the object of liberty is the good. The object of toleration is the evil. All right? Many other evils are tolerated. That is, they are not punished. And this is important, for to tolerate is neither to approve nor even permit. Very important. People think toleration is a permission. It is not. It is looking the other way. It is to not punish. All right? So it may be false religions may be tolerated, but toleration always requires a sufficient reason. And the sufficient reason must be proportionate to the level of toleration. That is, to avoid a greater evil or to achieve a greater good. That's the rules of toleration. So that has to be proportionate to what you're tolerating. See, some things are intolerable, where toleration would be wrong. Some people think that toleration is a virtue. So the obligation virtue has as its object always the good. Well, to be tolerant, you see, a very tolerant person. You could be a horrible sinner by being tolerant in certain cases. It is not a virtue. It is simply an act by which you do not punish something which in principle ought to be punished, but you do not do it for a sufficient reason. So for the example, the police tolerate your speeding. Strictly speaking, they can pull you over for 1 mile an hour over the speed limit. But they know, and you know, that they're not going to do it, and you're always just testing what their toleration is. In this country, it's by state. You see, so you go to Ohio, you slow down. They don't tolerate as much as Pennsylvania does. And then you get to the Michigan line and you hit the gas pedal because nobody gives any tickets in Michigan. It's true too. You go over that Michigan line. Whoa! And there's 2 lanes in Ohio and there's 3 lanes in Michigan, so it is just open all the way. And it's because they tolerate a lot in Michigan. I mean, occasionally they give a ticket, but you would have to be doing. I've seen people. I'd be doing 80 in the middle lane, they fly by me at least 90 or 95 in Michigan. That's common. The Florida Turnpike is the same. There's no tickets on the Florida Turnpike. They figure probably you pay and you can do whatever you want. The slow lane is 80. So that's toleration. But they're not, you say they're not permitting it, they're not even approving it, but they're tolerating it. In fact, some evils must be tolerated in society, since otherwise worse evils will follow. But this tolerance must not be an approbation or a protection or an inculcation. There's where it is a positive way in which to promote an evil or to establish an evil in society. Proof: liberty of conscience considered socially is founded in nothing else than political atheism, is extremely dangerous, and is self-contradictory. Therefore, liberty of conscience socially considered cannot be approved in any way. See, so at best it can be tolerated. Its best case, so to speak, it can be tolerated, but never approved in any way. It is founded, first of all, in political atheism. Liberty of conscience is the concession of the right of individuals to think however they please concerning God. That is, the right to submit things which pertain to God and religion, and the duties which flow from these things, to the definition and judgment of individual conscience, which is therefore constituted as the criterion of religion, the individual conscience. By the way, that idea of liberty of conscience comes again directly from John Locke, that the state should say nothing about people's religions, except that he said the state should outlaw Roman Catholicism and atheism. He put those two things in the same boat. See, so everybody else gets a free pass, except the papists and the atheists. But why would he accept them? Freedom of conscience, freedom of conscience. It's because they're bigots and hypocrites and rotten, stinking people. That's why. Not that I'm against John Locke or anything like that. So, just as in many other things, man errs not only from ignorance, but also from malice, so he does in those things which pertain to religion. As a matter of fact, in religion, the ignorance of human beings has been the most evident when you think of what human beings have worshipped in the past. Even great civilizations such as Egypt, Greece, and Rome. The Romans would open up the entrails of animals in order to see if they were going to win a battle or not. Or if an eagle flew across the sky during a religious ceremony of the Roman pagans, that was a good sign. I mean, they were sick with superstition, yet they built up a great empire. They were great engineers, everything else. I mean, they're very intelligent. But and in the Middle Eastern, they worshipped all kinds of things, including flies. In the Middle East, and the Chaldeans and those, they worship fire in Persia, which came up in Assisi. There was fire worship at Assisi. Yeah. Or Buddhism, idolatry, adoring stone things. I mean, what people have thought up as religion, the ignorance of man has never been so apparent as in matters of religion. Since religion imposes more severe duties by which the depraved passions are brought under control. So religion which tells you that certain things are a mortal sin is not a popular religion among pagans. Because, however, in liberty of conscience there is truly a right to error and impiety. That's the evil of it. This right cannot be approved in society and by society unless the society is guilty of religious skepticism or political atheism, which is the norm of every society in the world practically today, except for the Muslims. Two, it is extremely dangerous for society, for as long as actions remain in the conscience, they are the property of the individual and fall under the judgment of God alone. Excuse me. But when these actions are manifested, they have a relation to the other members of society, and consequently, when they inflict an evil upon the members of society, they fall under the domain of public authority, such as abortion. Just as men suffer scandal or any other kind of loss from the misdeeds of other men, such as unborn babies, so for a greater reason they would suffer both scandal and damage from the public and unpunished dissemination of error and impiety. That abortion is okay. Freedom of conscience. And even more so if it were permitted and approved, which it is, by law. For these things directly impede the intellectual and moral perfection of men, to say the least. They also kill them off. Do not impede or even improve of these things, scandals and damages, which are worse than corporeal damage, because the idea of abortion is worse actually than the abortion. False ideas generate evil acts. Because you have to get the idea in your head first that it is okay to kill this unborn baby before you will do it. The ideas rule the world. That's an old saying. Ideas rule the world. You must have an evil idea before you posit an evil act. Is not only, yes, but also the very perversion and the very order of society. In the 1960s, you would be arrested if you did an abortion. If a doctor or any kind of abortion practitioner did an abortion, it was always done in secret, and if it were found out, you'd be arrested. It is self-contradictory. Indeed, either liberty of conscience is a right or it is not. If it is not a right, then why is it proclaimed? If it is a right, then why is it limited? In this limitation of it stands the contradiction of those who defend liberty of conscience. For if the liberty of conscience is a right with regard to the duties of religion towards God, and the political authority is scrupulous in preserving unharmed this right, that very same authority cannot, without a manifest contradiction, and without obvious violence, impede this right from being exercised fully. So you could do whatever you want. You have liberty of conscience. So why can you impede that? Why, for example, women would argue it's my body, I can do whatever I want with it. I say, well, then why should that be impeded? That's why the idea of limiting abortion is absurd. It just fans the flames of all of the argument of the abortionists, because they would say that. Why can you impede that? By what authority do you impede if you say it's okay in certain circumstances? It's either right or it's wrong. Or in any kind of religion, you could practice anything. You could the most bizarre religions. You'd say, well, if that's what you think, that's what you think. Yes.
Was the kingdom of Israel in BC times flip-flopping so much between paganism and the worship of the old law? Were they doing that because they tolerated pagans amongst them?
Well, that was Solomon. He had all the girls there. And he got converted to the idols by his girlfriends. Well, there was the case of, what was the one that's in Isaiah, where in order to defeat the Syrians, he was going to worship the Syrian gods. In order to defeat the Syrians. I really don't know what the motives were in each case, but they did fall into idolatry a lot, or false religions of the neighboring peoples a lot. And the Old Testament is just one story after another of revelation, worshiping idols, horrible penances imposed by God, and then penance, and then they return to the true religion, then they go back to idolatry, then they return to the true religion. That's the Old Testament. And that's why our Lord, the last chance for the Hebrews was our Lord. That's why the fig tree, and many comments by our Lord that this is your last chance. There's going to be no more of this back and forth. And you know what happened? 70 AD. See, that's when they finally and definitively lost their title to the Holy Land. The Holy Land was given to them in order that they be a people, a faithful people, that would receive the Messiah and bring him to the rest of the world. Yes?
But Your Excellency, didn't they also have a natural title at that point, having dwelt there for so long?
I would say no. No, their whole title was theological and religious. Otherwise, God would not have taken away from them. I mean, the destruction of Jerusalem was effectively the destruction of that nation. I mean, there were some Jews left there, but then they were removed by Hadrian. And then he called it Palestine. Because they rose up against Hadrian. Murdered some of the Romans and all. I mean, they have been a very troublesome thing they were a very troublesome thing for the Roman Empire. So no, they're titled to that. I mean, Joshua was given the mission of driving out the Canaanites, who were pagans and all. But I mean, that it originally belonged to the Canaanites. You could argue the same thing, that the Canaanites were there before the Israelis were there, and therefore it belongs more to the Canaanites than to the Israelis. The only reason why they had the right to take it from the Canaanites was because God told them to. See, so I mean, it was an aggression. Otherwise, it was an aggression, and they have no right to it. No, you
well,
don't
I
agree?
just thought that peaceful possession of territory for a certain amount of time gave you a certain ownership of it.
Peaceful. That means undisputed, and no one would say that they had undisputed possession of that land except God. In other words, the Canaanites wouldn't say that oh yeah, well, you won the war, therefore you're. I mean, if you were to ask Canaanites at that time, what do you think about this Jewish aggression? They would say, well, I think it's horrible, and they have no right to do this. Those being pagans, they would say. So I don't think you could argue that a peaceful possession. It's not a peaceful possession. It's a theological possession, and based on theology. And then you could argue back that having abandoned that territory, the Canaanites had it from, say, the time of Hadrian up to 1948. That's a long, and it was on that was a peaceful possession. And that's a long, long time for a prescription. Normally 70 years is a prescription. That's something like, what is it, 1,000 years? I forget what it is, but 1,500 years or something? 1,600 years, peaceful possession. No, as far as I'm concerned, as far as their claim, I think they have absolute claim to that land. But the way they're going about it, I think, is wrong. Killing people, innocent people. But no, they never. You would never say that the Jewish people had a peaceful possession. No, I don't think so. Not if you were to. I mean, we're not there to ask, but I don't think any of the Canaanites would feel good about having been thrown off their land in the time of Joshua and the destruction of Jericho and all that. I don't think they feel real good about it. No, if you were to occupy a land that was virtually not occupied, and that's a peaceful possession, and nobody ever objected to it. That's a peaceful possession. And that's the argument for the Papal States. That whatever you want to say about any documents or anything like that, they had peaceful possession of those Papal States at least from the time of Pepin all the way to 1870, which is the greatest peaceful possession in all of Europe. I mean, the map of Europe changed practically every day with wars and territory and dukedoms and all of this, and I mean, it constantly changed. But Papal States were always there. There was some agitation about Ferrara. That's why Julius II went to war against some of the Italian potentates who were trying to grab Ferrara, which was part of the Papal States. So. But everybody recognized the Papal States as sovereign states. Until the Garibaldi animal came along. So, okay, papal condemnations of liberty of conscience. Sometime. Gregory XVI in Mirari Vos. And from this most wicked source of indifferentism flows this absurd and erroneous idea, or rather insanity, that one must admit and guarantee for each person the liberty of conscience. To this utterly pestilent error, the full and immoderate liberty of opinions opens the way, which is spreading widely to the destruction of sacred and civil welfare. Some even say with supreme impudence that some benefit to religion could flow from it. But what death of the soul is worse than freedom for error, said St. Augustine. For since all restraint has been removed, by which men are kept on the paths of truth, since their nature inclined to evil is now plunging headlong, we say in truth that the bottom of the pit has been truly opened, referring to Apocalypse, from which John saw smoke arising, by which the sun was darkened with locusts coming out of it to devastate the earth. How's that for a condemnation? He was really great, Gregory XVI. He was really good. Pius IX in the Syllabus of Errors. Every man this is condemned. Every man is free to embrace and profess that religion which he, led by the light of reason, thinks to be the true religion. Bergoglio, all religions are a path to God. Number 16, in the worship of any religion whatever, men can find the way to eternal salvation and can attain eternal salvation. So ecumenism, the Spirit of God does not hesitate to use these false religions as means of salvation. Vatican II. There's more of these. I just put in this Cardinal Hergenrother. There's more in the back here in the beginning. Papal condemnations. Yes. So Cardinal Hergenrother, he was a very learned cardinal. He has a big dictionary in German. So for those of you who know German, you can go read his Kirchenlexikon, which is very good. Very anti-liberal. He lived in the from about 1840 to about 1905, something like that. So he was in that whole period of liberalism. And he wrote something called the Catholic Church and the Christian State. Charity may call for any sacrifice, but not for a denial of reason or logic. What a beautiful statement. Catholic truth cannot be sacrificed to Catholic charity. Charity cannot require what is highest. The truth of revelation should be made subordinate. Neither can it regard truth and error with equal favor, nor accept error instead of truth. See, some people say, well, it's charitable, to be tolerant. I think, it's against charity. So, neither can it regard truth and error with equal favor, nor accept error instead of truth. We may regret the error of another and excuse it as being held in good faith or ignorance. But insofar as he is in error, we cannot allow him to hope for salvation. This would only strengthen him in his error and do him wrong. It would be contrary to the precept of Christian charity. In other words, you can't just leave him in his error. Christian charity demands that you try to instruct him. Error, by its very nature, leads to hell. In other words, by its very nature, leads to hell. Yes, you might be excused because of ignorance, but by its very nature, it's going to lead you away from God. So false religions are a means of damnation in themselves. They are a means of damnation. In other words, they will bring you to hell infallibly if you follow them with full knowledge of their error. Now, most people don't. It's hard to say. Only God knows what the consciences of people are, but probably the average pious Protestant does not think too much about the fact that he's in a false religion. Probably not. But some people might. In other words, some people might say, yeah, this doesn't make any sense, but I don't care. And that's not good conscience. Excuse me. Tolerance or intolerance may exist in governments and in society as in individuals, but this more as the effect of a habit than of a principle. Society is indebted for its prevailing spirit of toleration not to modern philosophers who have had nothing new to say about it, but to the force of circumstances, the multitude of religious parties, to skepticism, to indifference, to the lassitude produced by wars, to greater gentleness in manners, to the improved means of travel and intercommunication among men, to the preponderance of material interests. That's true. It's the modern world, you might say. Philosophy upheld civil toleration, but its elements went further. As Bossuet foresaw, they desired ecclesiastical or dogmatic toleration, which is religious indifference. Even if the former were conceded, the latter could never be, from a Catholic point of view, religious indifference. For any ecclesiastical body conscious of being the depository of absolute objective truth and of holding the eternal destinies of the whole human race must consider itself the only true church, and all other creeds differing from its own as more or less in error. Therefore, this church must consider herself deputed to resist and refute all such creeds, and thereby to cause the true doctrine to prevail. And that's Bossuet in his Histoire des Variations. That means the history of the variations of the Protestant sects. He wrote a book about it, 4 volumes. And in the footnote, if one declared openly for ecclesiastical tolerance, that is, that one recognize all the heretics as true members and true children of the church, one would observe very evidently the indifference of religions. One makes therefore translate that. It seems to enclose itself into civil tolerance. Their veritable purpose is to hide indifference of religions under the merciful appearance of civil tolerance. In other words, that civil tolerance very easily flows into downright liberty of religion and liberty of conscience. Very easily. So you may be referring to the fact that Louis XIV revoked the Edict of Nantes in 1682. The Edict of Nantes was done by Henry IV. Was the first Bourbon, and had been a Protestant. He was famous for saying Paris is worth a mass. So his conversion to Catholicism was not very sincere, but he gave civil liberty to the practice of Protestantism in France. Louis XIV revoked that in 1682, and Bossuet was his advisor, and he was the Bishop of Meaux, which is just to the east of Paris, and I'm sure that comes from a comment, or at least it's related to that. So all the Protestants had to get out of France, and they went to Holland, which was the place to go. It's like the homeless center for religious rejects. So what's today? No, 23. All right. So all of this is very topical for Vatican II. Nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, amen. Subtuum praesidium confugimus sancta Dei genitrix nostros deprecationis ne despicias et necessitatibus, sed a periculis cunctis libera nos semper, virgo gloriosa benedicta. Amen. Nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. No spiritual conference. And Angelus in private.